There's a specific kind of pain that nobody talks about. Not failure, not heartbreak. It's the feeling of moving through your life like a guest in someone else's story. You wake up. You do what's expected. You perform the version of yourself that other people recognize. And somewhere between the routine and the exhaustion, a question starts forming that you don't have an answer to. What is this actually for? Most men bury that question. They work harder, drink more, scroll longer. They keep moving so they don't have to hear it. But the question doesn't go away. The Stoics knew this, not as a philosophical abstraction, but as something they watched happen to real men in real time. Men with money, men with power, men who, by every external standard, had figured it out. They hadn't. And the difference between those men and the ones who lived with clarity wasn't intelligence. It wasn't discipline, at least not in the way we think about it today. It was something quieter, something most men never find because they're too busy looking in the wrong direction. That's what this is about. Here's the first thing to understand. A man without direction isn't lazy. He's usually the opposite. He works, he hustles, he consumes more information in a week than a Roman philosopher read in a year. But all that motion exists in a vacuum because he's never stopped to ask what it's actually serving. The Stoics called this living kata doxon, according to opinion, according to what others expect, according to the image you've inherited from your family, your culture, the algorithm that knows what keeps you clicking. You are not building a life. You are maintaining an appearance. Epictetus talked about this with unusual precision. He was a slave who became one of the most respected philosophers in Rome, which already tells you something about where clarity actually comes from. He said most men confuse things that are in their control with things that are not, and this confusion is the root of all suffering. Your reputation is not in your control. Other people's approval is not in your control. The direction your life takes when you let external forces navigate it is not in your control. The only thing in your control is your judgment, your response, your chosen direction. And if you haven't chosen one, you haven't exercised the only power you actually have. This isn't motivational language, and this is a structural observation about how men lose themselves, slowly, without noticing, one accommodation at a time. The man without direction didn't wake up one day and decide to drift. He made 1,000 small decisions to avoid the discomfort of deciding. And drift is what happens when you avoid deciding long enough. What's more uncomfortable? The temporary pain of choosing a hard direction, or the permanent dull ache of having no direction at all? That question isn't rhetorical. Most men think their problem is motivation. It isn't. Their problem is that they want the wrong things. Or more precisely, they want things they've been told to want, and they're working toward those things with genuine effort and wondering why arriving at them feels like nothing. Epictetus had a framework for this. He called it the Dichotomy of Control, but embedded inside that framework is something more radical, the idea that most human desire is misdirected from the start. We pursue external goods, status, money, recognition, a specific version of success, and these things aren't inherently wrong. But when they become the primary orientation of a man's life, a problem emerges. External goods can be taken. They depend on conditions outside you. You can want them, work for them, and still lose them. And if your sense of direction is tied to them, you lose your direction when you lose them. Seneca put it plainly. It is not that I am brave. It is that I know what is worth fearing. A man who has never examined his desires doesn't know what's worth wanting, so he wants what everyone around him wants. And he fears losing what everyone around him has. He lives inside a loop he didn't design and can't exit because he can't see its walls. The discipline of desire isn't about wanting less. It's about wanting precisely. What do you want that no one taught you to want? What direction would you move in if approval wasn't a factor? What does your life look like when you strip away every layer of performance? Most men never answer those questions, not because they can't, but because answering them requires you to admit that the path you're on might be wrong. And that admission is terrifying. But here's what the Stoics understood that most modern self-improvement content misses entirely. The terror of that admission is the beginning of direction, not the obstacle to it. The discomfort you feel when you honestly examine your desires isn't a problem to be solved. It's a signal pointing toward the work that actually matters. Stop for a second, because everything you've heard so far is only half the picture. Most men, when they encounter Stoic philosophy for the first time, make a specific mistake. They treat it as a technology for endurance, a way to suffer more efficiently, a mental framework that makes the unbearable bearable so you can keep going. That's not what this is. Marcus Aurelius didn't develop his philosophy so he could tolerate being emperor. He developed it because he understood something about the nature of difficulty that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid understanding. He called it amor fati, love of fate, not acceptance, not resignation. Love. The distinction matters more than it seems. Acceptance is passive. It says, this happened, and I will live with it. Amor fati is active. It says, this happened, and I will find a way to need it. It says the obstacle is not in the way of the direction. It is the direction. Men without direction are almost always men who are waiting. Waiting for better circumstances. Waiting for the fear to subside. Waiting to feel ready, feel certain, feel like the timing is right. They are waiting for conditions that will never arrive. And meanwhile, the life that was available to them, the one built from the exact circumstances they're in right now, moves past them unused. Amor fati is not an attitude adjustment. It's a radical reorientation of where you think your direction is supposed to come from. You stop waiting for the right conditions, and you start extracting direction from the conditions you have. This is what separates men who find their way from men who stay lost. Not talent, not luck, not a perfect plan. The willingness to build with what's already in front of them. Knowing philosophy and practicing philosophy are two completely different things. This is where most men fail. They read Marcus Aurelius, feel something shift, and then go back to the same patterns the following morning. Because understanding an idea intellectually and restructuring your daily behavior around it are separated by a gap most people never cross. The Stoics were obsessive about practice, specifically about daily self-examination. Seneca ended every day by reviewing his actions, not in a self-flagellating way. And he wasn't cataloging his failures so he could hate himself. He was auditing his behavior against his stated values. He was asking whether the man he was today resembled the man he intended to be. When will I live, if not now? He wrote. Not as a motivational line, but as a serious question aimed at himself. Most men live horizontally. They move through time accumulating experiences, relationships, possessions. They rarely live vertically, going deeper into who they are, what they believe, what they're actually doing with the time they have. The examined life is not comfortable. It confronts you with the gap between who you are and who you intend to be. But that gap is not the problem. That gap is the direction. Start there. Every morning, what do I intend today? Every evening, what actually happened? Not with judgment, with honesty. In the man who does this consistently, even imperfectly, begins to develop something rare. Not certainty about where he's going, something more useful. Clarity about who he is. And a man who knows who he is doesn't stay directionless for long. The clarity you build in private is what guides you when the external world offers no clarity at all. No one is comfortable with this one. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. The Stoics didn't treat death as a dark subject to be avoided in polite conversation. They treated it as the only lens that accurately shows you how much your life is worth. Marcus Aurelius returned to it constantly. Seneca wrote entire letters structured around it, not to generate despair, to generate urgency of a very specific, non-anxious kind. Here's what they understood. A man who doesn't think about death lives as though he has unlimited time. And a man who believes he has unlimited time makes unlimited excuses. He defers. He delays. He tells himself the direction will become clear eventually. When the circumstances improve, when he's more ready, he runs out of time still waiting. Memento mori is not morbid. It's clarifying. When you actually sit with the reality that your time is finite, not abstractly, but specifically, the noise gets quieter. The opinions of people who don't matter stop mattering. The petty anxieties that consume most of your mental energy lose their weight. What remains is the question underneath everything. What do I want to do with what I actually have? Not with infinite time, with this amount. The specific, limited, non-negotiable amount you were given. A man who asks that question seriously cannot stay directionless. The answer might be unclear at first. It might take time to emerge. But the act of asking it, with the full weight of its implications, changes the conditions from which direction grows. Men without direction often end up in one of two places, surrounded by people who reinforce their current state, or completely alone, in a silence that doesn't feel like solitude. It feels like absence. The Stoics had something specific to say about both. Solitude, practiced intentionally, was considered essential, not as punishment, not as withdrawal from life, as the condition under which honest thinking becomes possible. Seneca wrote that a man must occasionally retreat from the crowd, not to escape people, but to escape the version of himself that only exists in their presence. The man you are when you're performing for others is not the full man, and a partial man cannot find a complete direction. But isolation without intention is different. It becomes a mirror that only shows your fears back to you. The Stoic practice here is specific. Use solitude to examine, not to ruminate. There's a difference between thinking clearly about your situation and turning that situation over and over without moving toward anything. Rumination is directionless. Examination produces output. Ask the hard questions when you're alone. What have I been avoiding? What do I know about myself that I haven't acted on? Where am I being dishonest about what I want? Then bring those answers back to your life and let them change something. The point of the examined life is not to understand yourself in the abstract. It's to build, from that understanding, a life that could actually be yours. The last piece is the one most philosophical content never gets to, because it's less dramatic than everything that came before it. Direction doesn't arrive, it's built. Men spend enormous energy looking for the thing that will tell them where to go. The right mentor, the right book, the right moment of clarity, and occasionally those things help. But they can't do the fundamental work, which is the decision to move. The Stoics were not passive philosophers. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire under conditions that would have broken most men. Epictetus built a school of thought that outlasted empires. Seneca wrote letters that people are still reading 2,000 years later. Or these were not men who waited for direction to find them. They chose a direction consistent with their values. They moved. They adjusted when they were wrong. They moved again. That's it. There's no formula underneath this. There's no secret insight that makes it easier than it is. The man who finds his direction is the man who stops treating direction as something to be found and starts treating it as something to be constructed. From his values, from his honest self-examination, from his willingness to act on what he knows, even when what he knows is incomplete. Seneca's words, written 2,000 years ago, still carry the full weight of this. While we are postponing, life speeds by. You already know more than you think you know. The question is whether you're going to do something with it. If this changed something for you, share it with someone who needs